Gaza, where 273 of our colleagues have been killed. It sets a precedent for governments to accuse a United Nations entity of terrorism as a pretext to clamp down on human rights. It sets a precedent for criminalizing humanitarian assistance and protection. This year, propaganda efforts spearheaded by the Israeli Foreign Ministry received a boost of $150 million. The political attacks on the agency are motivated by the desire to strip Palestinians of the refugee status, thereby unilaterally changing the long-established parameter for a political solution. The objective is to deny Palestinian refugees the right to self-determination and erase their history and identity. But let me be clear, the right of Palestinian refugees to assistance are not derived from UNRWA's mandate. They exist independently of the agency. And if UNRWA ceases to protect and assist Palestinian refugees, their rights will not only remain, but there will be much greater emphasis on the right to return or to be resettled, for which UNRWA has no mandate. Mr. President, a ceasefire in Gaza must be followed by a political transition that includes an orderly conclusion of UNRWA's mandates and the handover of its public-like services to empowered and prepared Palestinian institutions. This is a path now pursued by the Global Alliance for the Implementation of the Two-State Solution, led by Saudi Arabia, the European Union, and the League of Arab States. Only a political pathway of this nature can ensure the protection and welfare of Palestinian refugees and peace and security in the region and beyond. A clear choice lies before us. We can allow UNRWA to implode due to the Knesset legislation and the suspension of fundings by key donors. The repercussions of this implosion will not be confined to national borders and will only further destabilize the region. Alternatively, we can allow the agency to progressively conclude its mandate within the framework of a political process. UNRWA was always meant to be temporary. A fair and lasting political solution would allow the agency to hand over its services and workforce to a Palestinian administration. UNRWA has much to offer in support of a political solution. The agency is the largest provider of primary health care in Gaza and the second largest in the West Bank. Our health services and expertise are integral to building a strong national health system. UNRWA has also a pivotal role to play in education. In Gaza today, 650,000 girls and boys are living in the rubble, learning nothing more than how to survive. They have already lost more than 2 years of learning. Absent a full-fledged state, only UNRWA has the capacity to bring these children back to learning. So great is the impact that more than 260,000 children, half of them girls, enrolled in our online learning. If we fail to resume education in Gaza and to preserve it in the occupied West Bank, we will sacrifice an entire generation of Palestinian children. Member of the Council, the threat posed by political effort to dismantle UNRWA is compounded by financial challenges, with key donors deciding to end or reduce their contribution to the agency. I'm appealing for an urgent increase in financial support to UNRWA, the early disbursement of allocated funds, and a review of funding currently on hold. I also take this opportunity to underscore the agency's long-standing commitment to neutrality. A detailed presentation at UNRWA's Advisory Commission meeting last November made clear that our high-level action plan to implement the recommendation of the Colonna report is on track. We will also continue to take all necessary steps to investigate credible allegations made against the agency and its personnel. Mr. President, member of the Council, implementing the Knesset legislation will heighten instability and deepen despair in the occupied Palestinian territory at a critical moment. I'm seeking your decisive intervention in support of peace and stability in the occupied Palestinian territory and the broader region. First, push back against the implementation of the Knesset legislation. UNRWA's personnel and services are integral to the success of the ceasefire. Second, insist on a genuine political path forward that delineates UNRWA's role as a provider of education and healthcare. The agency is essential for ensuring a viable political transition. Finally, ensure that the financial crisis does not abruptly end UNRWA's life-saving. The agency cannot continue to operate in the face of extraordinary challenges without adequate resources. In closing, I would like to share with you a message received from a young person in Ghana last week. It is a stark reminder of the heavy responsibility we bear. Quote, of a home that once was a place of warmth and life. Now, my days are spent searching for the most basic necessities like flour to feed my family. What truly breaks me is my helplessness in the face of children. Their innocent eyes seek safety I cannot provide, an answer I do not have. Around us, the elderly sit in silence, their hearts weighed down by decades of loss and suffering. And here I am, dying 1,000 times every day as I think of all that I cannot do for them. Unquote. Unlike the author of this message, we are in a position to do something. It only requires your decisive action and leadership. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Lazzarini for his briefing. I now give the floor to Mr. Jan Egeland. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. President, honored members of the Security Council. I speak as a lifelong friend of Israel and the Palestinians, and as one who has repeatedly called out the atrocities and war crimes committed by all sides, including on the 7th of October in and against Israel. And as you may know, I led the Norwegian facilitation of the Oslo Accords in 1993 and have worked on the Palestinian-Israel peace process ever since. I worked closely with Yitzhak Rabin, Shimon Peres, and Yasser Arafat at the time. Let me here first reiterate something that all European, American, and local humanitarian organizations on the ground in Gaza agree on ever since some donor states started to defund UNRWA. UNRWA plays an indispensable humanitarian role in Gaza and in the West Bank, and it cannot be replaced by any other of us, the humanitarian organizations on the ground. We all rely on UNRWA's logistical capacity. We operate in UNRWA schools. The people we support are attended to in UNRWA health clinics. And as Philippe Lazzarini just detailed, the organization has and still is responsible for a massive relief operation in the hour of greatest need for the Palestinian civilians in Gaza. There are, of course, important recommendations in the Colonna report that the organization is and must be implementing. But again, you need to know that we, and most importantly, the Palestinians, simply cannot do without UNRWA. Based on reports from my colleagues on the ground and my own two latest visits in recent months, I will share with you some hard facts about our realities on the ground. First, the positive news. The ceasefire between Israel and Hamas has at long last allowed some hostages and a number of detainees to finally be reunited with their families, and it has introduced a welcome halt in the hostilities in Gaza. Starting yesterday, we have seen how tens of thousands of civilians finally could make their way back to their homes in Gaza's north. But when I visited Gaza City in December, I was shocked by the destruction that these people will find in the north as they come home. It will be a race against the clock to give families the emergency shelter, the water, the sanitation, and the other basic relief, followed by the recovery and rehabilitation of civilian infrastructure, from homes to electricity and sewage systems across Gaza, and in particular in the north. We also need to ensure that people can move freely from south to north and north to south also in the future. Of the more than 46,000 people killed, with thousands still under the rubble, half are women and children, all are innocent. More than 1,000 health workers have been killed, alongside more than 350 aid workers. The vast majority were colleagues from UNRWA. And the Security Council must understand that 66% of all structures in Gaza have been damaged or destroyed, according to the United Nations' own satellite center analysis of very high resolution satellite imagery. 80% of commercial facilities are damaged or destroyed, 68% of the road network. And this includes the damage or destruction of 87% of the homes in Gaza since the Israeli assault began. When I last traveled to Gaza in December, I drove for hours across the strip, only to see destruction and devastation. I could not believe the Second World War-like once urban wastelands that Gaza City, Khan Yunis, and other cities have become. It is, to me, similar to the destruction of Syria's besieged cities like Eastern Ghouta, Aleppo, and Homs during the war waged by the Assad regime. Also there, vast urban areas were destroyed by indiscriminate warfare as the people were besieged and starved. I was then the UN Special Advisor for Humanitarian Diplomacy in Syria, and I was then glad to see the near unanimous condemnation of the abuse of international humanitarian law. According to the Shelter Cluster for Gaza, which NRC leads, 1.3 million people now need emergency shelter support and basic household items. The UN damage assessment released this month showed that clearing over 50 million tons of rubble left in the aftermath of the bombardment could take 21 years and cost at least $1.2 billion. For 2 decades, children will have nowhere to play due to the rubble and the debris and the countless unexploded bombs. The universally agreed principles in international law of proportionality, distinction, and military necessity have been thoroughly violated. Against this background, the humanitarian groups on the ground are desperately trying to scale up our assistance after having been severely impeded throughout the conflict. My organization, Norwegian Refugee Council, which is active in several sectors, including shelter, water and sanitation, education and legal aid, we managed finally to have 18 trucks of humanitarian cargo enter Gaza last week after months of frustrated attempts. We are these days working to deliver an additional 4,500 pallets of essential supplies. but looting and attacks on aid convoys remain a major concern, particularly in high-risk zones such as the stretch between the Kerem Shalom border crossing and the Shukat Asufi junction. On the 22nd of January, a significant looting incident took place again and disrupted aid efforts when a criminal group hijacked 7 aid trucks near Kerem Shalom, injuring one driver during abduction. The following day, clashes in the area forced the cancellation of a planned UN and non-governmental organization rotation out of Gaza. Later the same day, an NRC convoy delivering trucks to our warehouse was nearly looted just meters from our premises. Swift action from the police ensured the trucks were secured with minimal losses. Humanitarian organizations also continue to face a number of bureaucratic and administrative challenges of bureaucratic nature, and it includes the systematic denial of visa and the renewal of work permits by Israel. On the 12th of September of last year, the Israeli National Security Council admitted to the Knesset that Israel was no longer issuing visas to employees of international humanitarian non-governmental organizations. And this appears to be part of a broader effort to undermine humanitarian work in the occupied Palestinian territory and limit assistance to the Palestinian population. But as the occupying power, Israel is legally obliged to facilitate humanitarian operations in Gaza and in the West Bank alike. So, Mr. President, Security Council members, in the short term, to address the urgent humanitarian needs and ensure an effective response in Gaza, we need the following. Number one, full and unrestricted access and the ability to move people and supplies, including fuel, freely from north to south and vice versa. Secondly, we need security and protection for aid operations. Authorities must implement robust security arrangements to protect humanitarian aid operations from looting and violence. A humanitarian organization must be allowed to collect aid from Gaza's crossings using sealed and secured transportation options, such as box trucks, as the open trucks we are forced to use are routinely looted. Measures must be taken to guarantee the safety of aid workers with clear commitments from the parties to the ceasefire agreement to respect humanitarian operations and our personnel. And thirdly, we need strengthened coordination and oversight messages. The UN must ensure more effective action-oriented coordination mechanisms to streamline aid delivery and avoid duplication of efforts. Increased international oversight is required to secure continued access over border crossings and to monitor compliance with international law. When one party, Israel, controls all aid to civilians on the other side without international monitors, we again repeatedly risk politically motivated closures. All parties to the ceasefire must be held accountable for their commitments with clear and transparent communication on the progress of humanitarian access and reconstruction efforts. And fourthly, we need financial and operational support urgently to scale up the humanitarian response. Immediate, flexible, and sustained funding is critical to meet the immense humanitarian and recovery needs and to scale up our response in Gaza. Israeli authorities must enable the safe and predictable flow of cash into Gaza so that humanitarian organizations can implement cash assistance programs, pay staff salaries, and procure essential goods and services. Only 2 Bank of Palestine branches are expected to reopen, with still no clear security framework for cash injection or circulation. While all of this is happening in Gaza, we are also alarmed by the surge in violence across the occupied West Bank. Israeli military operations and settler attacks have intensified, leading to widespread insecurity, displacement, and severe restrictions on Palestinian freedom of movement. The Israeli military operation Iron Wall and Jenin refugee camp, launched on the 21st of January, has already caused severe humanitarian consequences. And we are already witnessing similar patterns of disproportionate use of force in the West Bank as we saw in Gaza before the ceasefire. So, in conclusion, the current and much needed ceasefire in Gaza is, of course, extremely fragile, as it is welcome. And as negotiators engage in discussions on the following phases of the agreement, the international community must continue to put pressure on both Israeli and Palestinian decision makers. We also need stronger, more united, coherent, and more assertive pressure for peace, for compromise, and negotiated progress from the international and regional powers. Given the fragile nature of the Gaza ceasefire and the potential for more violence in the West Bank, the Security Council, in accordance with your mandate, should put all of your energies into achieving a peaceful resolution to the question of Palestine in line with international law. The UN General Assembly has scheduled key international mechanisms to address these challenges, including a high contracting parties meeting for the Geneva Conventions in March and an international conference in June to establish a plan for the implementation of a two-state solution. Because there cannot be sustainable peace without a long-lasting solution to the root causes of the conflicts. And the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank and the Israeli population all deserve a just and lasting peace. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank Mr. Egeland for his briefing. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of Algeria. Dear colleagues, I extend my deepest gratitude to you, Commissioner General Mr. Philippe Lazzarini and Mr. Jan Egeland for your briefings. Briefings which underscore once again how vital UNRWA is, not only for the Palestinian people, but for the entire region. Through you, I also thank the entire humanitarian community that continues to give so selflessly in support of the Palestinian people, especially in Gaza. These heroes, yes, these heroes risk their lives every day, and tragically, Gaza has become the deadliest conflict for humanitarian workers. It is our duty as the global community to protect them and to create an environment that allows them to continue their life-saving work in safety, in security. Dear colleagues, For over 75 years, UNRWA has been the lifeline for the Palestinian people. From birth to education, healthcare to food assistance, UNRWA has been an integral part of their lives. For generations of Palestinians, UNRWA is not just an agency. It is life itself. This role was especially crucial during the 15 months of the Israeli aggression against the Palestinian people in Gaza. UNRWA is the backbone of the humanitarian response, and its role remains essential under the ceasefire as efforts continue to address the urgent needs of the Palestinian people. For Palestinians, for the humanitarian community, and for the international community, UNRWA is irreplaceable. UNRWA is indispensable. Without UNRWA, who would provide the 9,500 daily health consultations that the agency currently offers? Who would provide 1 million people with the critical mental health and psychological support that UNRWA offers? Who would provide food to 388,000 families whose survival depends on UNRWA? Who will provide, who will deliver vital water, sanitation, and hygiene services, as UNRWA currently does for around 44% of these services? And who will ensure that 660,000 children, Palestinian children, return to learning in UNRWA schools, which are their only opportunity for education? It is clear halting UNRWA's operations will be a death sentence for Palestinians, particularly for the most vulnerable among them. Refugees. Dear colleagues, attacks on UNRWA and disinformation campaign against this agency are not new. Since its inception, the agency has been under destructive assault. Why? Because it symbolizes the Palestinian refugee and their right to return, a right that no one can seriously deny. Palestinian refugees, like all refugees around the world, retain this inalienable right. The question of UNRWA's neutrality has been raised time and time again. However, as the coroner reports confirm, and I quote, UNRWA possesses a more developed approach to neutrality than other similar UN or NGO entities. Despite these irrefutable facts, UNRWA continues to face serious attacks and allegations. Algeria believes that any such allegations should be independently and thoroughly investigated. We must not let false claim undermine UNRWA's crucial role in the life of millions of Palestinians. Dear colleagues, international law is clear. On the one hand, the Israeli occupying power has the responsibility and must ensure human treatment of the Palestinian population and meet all their needs. On the other hand, the Israeli occupying power does not have sovereign rights over the occupying Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem. A principle upheld by Article 47 of the Fourth Geneva Convention. In addition, UNRWA, mandated by the UN General Assembly, acts on behalf of the UN members. The collective will of the international community cannot simply be disregarded by any member of the UN, including the occupying power. Furthermore, UNRWA's headquarters in Jerusalem enjoy immunity under the 1946 Convention. Therefore, the laws recently adopted by the Knesset and order issued that threaten the very existence of UNRWA are a clear violation of international law. We must stand united in opposition to these laws and call for their reversal, as they threaten not only the right of Palestinian refugees, but also the very fabric of international order. Dear colleagues, the very existence of the Palestinian people in their homeland relies on the services provided by UNRWA. To halt its activities would serve the destructive plan aimed at erasing the presence of Palestinians between the river and the sea. Our responsibility is to support UNRWA and ensure that Palestinians are provided with the means to survive on their homeland, with dignity, with hope for a better future. To this end, UNRWA must continue its mandate until the establishment of Palestinian state, with East Jerusalem as its capital. I thank you. I now resume my duty as President of the Council. I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Commissioner General Philippe Lazzarini and Secretary General Jan Egeland for your briefings. The United States is strongly committed to implementing the ceasefire agreement so that the hostages can return home and the people of Gaza can look toward a brighter future under new leadership. We must never forget the lives taken as a result of the brutal Hamas terrorist attack on October 7th, 2023, and the horrors endured by countless innocent people in the war that followed. Hamas cannot be allowed to play spoiler on behalf of the Palestinians any longer. Not after it started this conflict through its horrific attack and its deplorable behavior. We have seen Hamas cynically weaponize the suffering of Palestinians by using civilian infrastructure, like schools and hospitals, to store caches of weapons, house fighters, and coordinate attacks. We are concerned about reports that returned Israeli hostages were held by Hamas in UN facilities during their prolonged captivity in Gaza. It is vital for a full and independent investigation to assess these very serious allegations. Unfortunately, this follows a pattern of serious allegations on the misuse of UN facilities, particularly UNRWA facilities, by Hamas terrorists. Today's briefing focuses on Israel's laws, set to go into effect on January 30th, that may impact UNRWA activities and prohibit contact between Israeli officials and UNRWA. It is Israel's sovereign decision to close UNRWA's offices in Jerusalem on January 30th. The United States supports the implementation of this decision. UNRWA exaggerating the effects of the laws and suggesting that they will force the entire humanitarian response to halt is irresponsible and dangerous. What is needed is a nuanced discussion about how we can ensure that there is no interruption in the delivery of humanitarian aid and essential services. UNRWA is not and never has been the only option for providing humanitarian assistance in Gaza. Many other agencies have experience and expertise to do this work and have done this work. UNRWA's work has been tainted and its credibility questioned due to the terrorist ties to Hamas that UNRWA staff had that were exposed as a result of Hamas's October 7th attack. Colleagues, now is the time to ensure that humanitarian aid reaches those in need throughout Gaza in accordance with the ceasefire deal the United States, Qatar, and Egypt secured. We urge countries to support this effort through additional funding and resources to help quickly scale up and distribute much-needed humanitarian aid. We must ensure Hamas or other terrorist groups are not permitted to seize, divert, or profit from this assistance, and that if it does so, it is reported immediately and held accountable. Gaza must be fully demilitarized to provide a brighter future for the Palestinian people. Hamas should have no role in its governance. The region has suffered for too long from the nefarious influence of Iran and its terrorist proxies, who have exerted undue influence and destabilized the region for decades. As a result of the ceasefire, the countries of the Middle East have an historic opportunity to reshape their region in a way that affords its people a better path forward, where Israel is fully integrated with its neighbors under the banner of the Abraham Accords. The United States will do its part to help create that future. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Guyana.
Mr. President, thank you for organizing this important briefing. To express Guyana's appreciation to UNRWA Commissioner General Philippe Lazzarini and Secretary General of the Norwegian Refugee Council, Jan Egeland, for the valuable information and perspectives provided. We pay today tribute to all humanitarian workers in Gaza, and given the focus of today's meeting, especially to Commissioner General Lazzarini and the staff of UNRWA for their unwavering commitment and service in the face of immense challenges. Mr. President, as I said a few weeks ago, UNRWA is now at a critical crossroads with extremely difficult prospects ahead of it in light of the entry into force of certain aspects of the legislation adopted by the Israeli Knesset last October. The international community, including the General Assembly and Security Council, must do all in its power to safeguard UNRWA's role in the occupied Palestinian territory. Dismantling the agency's operations will have catastrophic consequences for the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who depend on the agency's services. This is especially true at this time when Palestinians are seeking to recover from 15 months of brutal war and hardship. On this latter note, Guyana notes the unfolding developments in the Gaza Strip following the activation of the ceasefire agreement on 19th of January. We are pleased that the supply of humanitarian aid into Gaza has been ramped up, with hundreds of trucks, including UNRWA's, having entered since the start of the ceasefire. As a demonstration of its capacity to mobilize quickly and on a large scale, UNRWA brought in enough food to Gaza in 4 days to feed 1 million people. In fact, as Commissioner General Lazzarini reminded, 60% of all the food that came into Gaza since the start of the ceasefire has come in through UNRWA. Guyana urges that the parties continue to uphold their obligation to ensure the rapid, safe, unhindered, and sustained delivery of humanitarian aid to civilians in need. Palestinians in Gaza must receive our full support to rebuild their lives and livelihoods, and all impediments to this end must be removed. Mr. President, as international attention is pivoted towards recovery and reconstruction in Gaza, it is critical to keep in view the broader question of justice for the Palestinians in light of what they have experienced over the past 7 decades, and more so during the brutal war of the last 15 months. Record numbers have been killed and injured, and over 90% of all infrastructure, including homes and other critical infrastructure, have been damaged or destroyed, with piles of rubble as far as the eye can see. Yet, Mr. President, yesterday alone, we witnessed a throng of more than 200,000 Palestinians returning to their homes in North Gaza, and more will follow. They know the likelihood of finding their homes intact is almost zero, but they also know that this is their home, this is their land, even if flat. As the famous Chilean poet Pablo Neruda wrote, "You can cut all the flowers, but you cannot prevent spring from coming." Even amidst the more than 50 million tons of rubble, it is this spring, this hope for a new day in an independent state of their own, and the drums of war silenced, that lies in the heart of every Palestinian, and which fuels their unparalleled resilience. Guyana therefore urges respect for the right of Palestinians to their territory, in line with the pre-1967 borders, and call on the international community to protect this right and reject any suggestions of involuntary resettlement. An effectively functioning UNRWA is also part of a just response to the plight of Palestinians in Gaza. We are all aware of the massive efforts that would be required for relief, reconstruction, and recovery in Gaza. UNRWA is the only agency that has the capacity and experience to facilitate the delivery of services to Gazans, both in the near and long term, at the required scale. Guyana therefore calls on the government of Israel not to take any actions with respect to UNRWA that would further jeopardize the situation of Palestinians in the occupied Palestinian territory. We further call on Israel to uphold its international legal obligations to this end, including those related to the privileges and immunities of UN agencies. Mr. President, while Palestinians are attempting to begin the recovery process in Gaza, developments in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, are alarming. Guyana condemns in the strongest terms the increasing violence in the occupied West Bank, which is leading to a deterioration of humanitarian and security conditions there. We urge all parties, including the Israeli security forces, to cease all violations of the rights of Palestinians in the West Bank. We also urge Israel to refrain from all actions that could potentially undermine the ceasefire in Gaza and lead to renewed conflagrations in the region. Mr. President, in the context of the evolving situation in the occupied Palestinian territory, Guyana highlights the following points. First, all efforts should be focused on ensuring that the ceasefire in Gaza continues to hold, including after its first phase. We urge the parties to continue to negotiate in good faith, prioritizing the well-being of civilians and the achievement of a permanent ceasefire. Second, all attempts to unilaterally dismantle UNRWA must cease. As has been said before, it is the General Assembly that created UNRWA's mandate. Therefore, it is only the General Assembly that can alter or terminate that mandate. Israel is obligated to cooperate with the UN to ensure that the needs of Palestinian refugees are met, as long as that question remains unresolved. Third, the cycle of uncertainty, flux, and violence to which Palestinians have been subject could only be brought to an end with the implementation of the two-state solution. Guyana urges this Council, particularly those with influence, to exert every effort to move the needle on implementation of the two-state solution. We cannot stick to the old ways of doing things if we are getting no results. The people of Palestine deserve much more. Guyana urges all Council members for us to work together to ensure that the upcoming June conference yields concrete results for the Palestinian people. Allow me to conclude by reiterating Guyana's full commitment to contributing to a better and peaceful future for Palestinians. We acknowledge UNRWA's critical role in this endeavor and express our full support for the agency and to doing everything possible to ensure it can continue fulfilling its mandate in the occupied Palestinian territory. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Guyana for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would also like to thank UNRWA's Commissioner General, Mr. Lazzarini, and Mr. Jan Egeland of the Norwegian Refugee Council for the detailed yet sobering briefing. Mr. President, the greatest of humanity is not in being human, but in being humane. UNRWA, a UN agency with first-hand experience of more than 75 years in supporting the Palestinians in the Near East, has shown its compassion and discharged its duties in more than one ways. It has provided vital humanitarian support to millions and delivered primary health services, education, and shelter. Greece is gravely concerned that after 15 months of destruction, pain and suffering in Gaza are still present. A deeply alarming fact, especially if we take into account the loyalty, devotion, and commitment of UNRWA in alleviating the suffering of the population. At this critical moment, UNRWA's role is pivotal and irreplaceable. Its valuable work should not be undermined. Greece proudly continues to support UNRWA, especially at this darkest hour. We had recently renewed a voluntary contribution and voted in favor of the General Assembly on the relevant draft resolution last December. At the same time, we are deeply concerned about the attacks on UNRWA's personnel. Humanitarian workers must be protected at all times in line with international humanitarian law. Mr. President, just a few days ago, we all welcomed with relief the ceasefire agreement, a deal which offers a unique opportunity to replace despair with hope. For that to happen, though, UNRWA must be allowed to play its part in the unimpeded distribution of humanitarian aid and reconstruction. Any day after scenario in the Gaza Strip should be treated with its substantial support and expertise. And while there is hope for the future, there is little power in the present. UNRWA has the power to deliver in the present, the power to protect the basic rights of thousands of people in Gaza, including children, and power which lies within UNRWA as the cornerstone of all humanitarian assistance in the Strip. In this regard, the international community should remain committed to the continued support of the agency. In this context, we call on Israel to reconsider the implementation of the legislation, as it will obstruct UNRWA's capacity to operate within its mandate in all the occupied Palestinian territories. We fully understand Israel's concern, and in this respect, we believe that the full implementation of the recommendation of the Colonna report, in combination with the principle of neutrality, remains crucial. At the same time, the ceasefire agreements offer an opportunity for UNRWA and Israel to work together so that the agency can continue providing its essential services. Mr. President, in concluding, let me stress that the only long-term solution for the region is to revitalize the political process to pave the way for political horizon for a two-state solution according to the relevant Security Council resolution, while recognizing the right of Israel to exist in peace and security. Greece, as a founding member of the United Nations, strongly believes that UN agencies embody a collective hope for a peaceful, secure and prosperous world. They provide lifeline support in the regions where hundreds of lives are put at risk. Hence, the service to humanity is invaluable. After all, it should be remembered that there is no higher religion than human service. To work for the common good is the greatest creed. UNRWA can work for the common good in Gaza and deliver this service. I thank you.
The representative of Greece. I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Господин председатель,
President,
благодарим делегацию Алжира
I'd like to thank the
за
Algerian
создание
delegation
брифинга по вопросу
for convening this
судебного
briefing on the
контексте
issue of
запрета его
UNRWA's fate
деятельности
in the context
на
of the ban on its
оккупированной
activities in the
палестинской
occupied
территории
Palestinian territory,
в результате
OPT, as a
принятых
result of the laws adopted by the Knesset,
которые на днях формально должны вступить в
laws
силу.
which are supposed to enter into force in the next few days
Признательны
formally.
за откровенную
We're
оценку
grateful
Генеральному
for the
комиссару
candid assessments provided by the Commissioner General, Mr. Philippe Lazzarini, as well as for the briefing by Mr. Jan Yegeland.
Коллеги, Совет
Colleagues,
Безопасности
the Security
неоднократно за
Council
последнее
has
время
on many
обсуждал
occasions
ситуацию в
discussed the
области
situation
Израиля
surrounding the steps taken by Israel to ban
Члены
UNRWA.
Совета
Members of the Security Council have
недвусмысленно
consistently
осуждают
and
Западную
unequivocally
Иерусалим
condemned and condemned
который, как
West
все
Jerusalem's
понимаем,
course
абсолютно
to break the
незаменим для
agency,
жителей
which, as
Газа
we all understand, is
Западного
absolutely
берега.
irreplaceable for Gazans and the residents
Это
of the West
следует
Bank.
и из последних отчетов
This is
ООН,
confirmed by the
указывающих,
latest
что
UN reports, which
значимая
indicate
доля
that a significant
распределяемости
portion of the
населения,
assistance
в том числе
distributed
той,
to the
которая
population,
массово начала
including
поступать
assistance,
в
which has begun to
После
arrive
заключения сделки
in the enclave
между
en masse
Израилем и Хамас
following the
приходится
deal
именно на
done
Запад.
between Israel and Hamas, is distributed through UNRWA.
Крайне востребованный опыт,
What's highly valuable
разветвленная
is the
система
agency's
оказания
experience,
гуманитарного содействия и
its
созданная
far-reaching
за
system
десятилетия
for
инфраструктура
providing humanitarian assistance, and
При этом
the
сегодня
agency's infrastructure
практически
established
все
over
жители
decades.
сектора
And yet
Газа
today,
могут
almost
быть отнесены
all
к
Gazans
категории
can be
наиболее
categorized
уязвимых
as
групп населения,
falling into the most
ибо
vulnerable
погляд
group
по их
category.
собственному
And
признанию,
UNRWA,
чуть ли
as they
не
themselves admit,
единственная
is practically
оставшаяся
the
в жизни
only
опора.
source of support they have left.
Однако, несмотря на все это, очевидно, что Израиль
Despite the
твердо
foregoing,
нацелился
it's
лишить
clear
по
that
возможности
Israel is
выполнять
dead
свою
set
основную
on
функцию,
stripping UNRWA
а газовикам
from the opportunity to
последнего
carry out its
спасательного
main
круга.
function and stripping Gaza
И
of
это,
the
несмотря
only
на то,
lifeline they had.
что выдвинутые
And this despite the
израильтянами
fact that
обвинения
the
о
allegations
несоблюдении
leveled
агентством
by the Israelis about the agency not
и о
complying with the
причастности
principle of
его
neutrality
19
and about the
сотрудников к жестокой атаке
19
Хамас,
agency staff
совершенной
being
7
involved in the
октября
ruthless
2023
Hamas
года.
attack committed
Так и
on
не были
7th of October
подкреплены
2023. These allegations have not been backed up by any
Кроме того,
convincing
никакие
evidence.
обвинения не могут
Moreover,
служить основанием
no
для
allegations
запрета
can serve as
работы
grounds
платформ,
for banning
которая
UNRWA's work,
создавалась не
an
Израилем, а
agency which was
решением
established not by
всего
Israel,
сообщества
but by a decision
тысячи.
taken by the entire international community back in
Мы
1949.
неоднократно
We've
подчеркивали, что
emphasized on many
израильские
occasions
законодательные
that
акты не только нарушают
Israeli laws not only violate the norms of international law, including the UN Charter, the Fourth Geneva Convention, and relevant General Assembly decisions,
но и противоречат
but these laws are also at odds with the conditions for Israel joining the UN back in 1949, which include the compliance with and implementation of two flagship UN GA resolutions, 181, the Partition Plan for Palestine, and 194, which refers to Palestine refugees. Furthermore, Israel's ban on the agency's activities and revocation of the privileges and immunities of this body are at odds with the purposes and principles of the UN. They are a flagrant violation by West Jerusalem of its international legal obligations, including those stemming from the Convention on the Privileges and Immunities of the United Nations.
Ни одно государство
No
не имеет права
state
в
has the
одностороннем
right to
порядке лишать
unilaterally
структурные
deprive
подразделения
UN
ООН и их
entities and
сотрудников
its personnel
привилегий и иммунитета.
of their privileges and
Подобный
immunities.
подход
Such an approach
делает бессмысленной
makes the very
саму
notion
концепцию привилегий
of
и иммунитета,
privileges and
призванную
immunities
обеспечить
pointless
беспрепятственность
and
notion that is supposed to ensure international civil servants being able to discharge their duties unfettered. In light of this, the Secretary General should take a more decisive stance, given that the flagrant violation of the Convention on the Privileges and Immunities of the UN is clear in this instance. A delay in the launch of a dispute settlement procedure only encourages further violations by Israel, which is getting confirmation that it is of its full impunity. We deem necessary to consider the UNRWA file, for the ICJ to consider this file as part of the request for a third advisory opinion about Israel's obligations in relation to the diplomatic and UN presence of Israel in the occupied territory. In addition, the ICJ's second advisory opinion of 19th June on the consequences arising from Israel's occupation ruled that Israel does not have the right to sovereignty over any part of the OPT or to exercise any sovereign powers in that territory. The same applies to Israel's ban on UNRWA activities. On top of the tragedy unfolding before our eyes, the agency is confronting the very real threat of physical destruction. In the 15 months of conflict, 270 UNRWA personnel have been killed. This is the highest personnel loss figure in the UN's entire history, a record. Over 200 UNRWA entities have been destroyed. Dozens of its personnel have been arbitrarily detained, and there were reports of them being tortured. We condemn all acts of violence against UN personnel. Poor attempts to use force to block the agency's work in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. Distinguished colleagues, wouldn't dare to issue this challenge to the international community and to violate international law so brazenly if it didn't enjoy and feel such absolute and unconditional military and economic support on the part of the United States. For the entire 15 months of the worsening of the Palestine-Israeli conflict, Washington has supplied Israel with weapons used to kill peaceful civilians. Washington has prevented the passage of any UN Security Council decisions that would have disrupted Israel's implementation of its plans in Gaza. The US is also blocking any attempts to craft collective Security Council measures to defend UNRWA. Thus, it's not an exaggeration to say that the fault for what's happening surrounding the agency falls squarely on the United States' shoulders. Today, we heard this from the representative of the US. It was crystal clear. I'd like to add that according to the US, Israel apparently has the right to shut down UNRWA in Jerusalem. How does this square with international law? The answer is it doesn't. This is an obvious example. This is a clear example of the so-called rules-based international order, which, for the United States, is a replacement for international law. We're calling our colleagues in Washington to come to their senses and to exert the necessary pressure on West Jerusalem to avoid further suffering on the part of Palestinian civilians. On our side, we reaffirm our readiness to partake and work on any UN initiatives, including here at the Security Council, initiatives aimed at maintaining UNRWA's presence in the OPT and at ensuring the safety of its personnel. We support the call issued by the Secretary General and the Commissioner General calls on Israel. We demand that Israel upholds its international legal obligations and repeals the implemented legislation. It's important to understand that the implementation of these laws banning UNRWA activities will deal a serious blow to the prospects of a ceasefire, which is already fragile, a ceasefire we're all interested in maintaining. In conclusion, we'd like to express Russia's unswerving support, as well as support on the part of Russian civil society. Not so long ago, the International Public Fund, the Russian Peace Foundation, nominated UNRWA for the 2025 Nobel Peace Prize. We believe this is a timely step which deserves broad-based international support, given the irreplaceable role of UNRWA in Gaza, as well as UNRWA's principled position, for which over 200 UNRWA personnel, which were discharging their duties, paid for with their lives. I thank you.
I thank the representatives of the Russian Federation. I now give the floor to the representative of France.
Monsieur le Président, je remercie
Mr.
le commissaire
President,
général de
I
l'UNRWA
thank the Commissioner General
ainsi que
of
le secrétaire
UNRWA
général du
as
Norwegian
well as
Refugee
the
Council
Secretary
pour
General of the
l'exposé.
Norwegian Refugee
Je
Council for
tiens
the
à
briefing.
réaffirmer
I
le
wish
plein
to
soutien de la
reaffirm
France à
France's full
l'UNRWA
support for
ainsi qu'à son
UNRWA
commissaire
as well
général.
as for the Commissioner
Depuis
General.
octobre
Since
2023,
October
les attaques
2023 and the
terroristes
terrorist
menées par
attacks
le
carried
Hamas,
out by Hamas,
l'UNRWA a été en première
UNRWA
ligne
has
pour
been in
porter
the front
secours à la
lines in
population
order
civile de
to provide
l'enclave.
relief to the civilian population in the
272 de
enclave.
ses collaborateurs sont
272
décédés
of their
dans l'exercice de
co-workers
ses
have
fonctions
died
pendant cette période. Dès le 29
in
octobre
carrying out
dernier,
their
la
functions
France
during
a
this
déploré
period. Since the
l'adoption
29th of
par le
October,
Parlement
France has
israélien
deplored
de
the
deux
adoption
lois
by the Israeli
visant
Parliament of
l'UNRWA.
2 laws against
Leur mise en
UNRWA.
œuvre
The
priverait
implementation of
des
these laws
centaines de
would
milliers de
deprive
civils
hundreds of
d'aides
thousands of
essentielles en matière
civilians
d'abri, de
of
soins,
essential
d'éducation et
aid in the form of
d'alimentation,
healthcare, education,
et
and
dans les
food in
territoires
Gaza
palestiniens
and in the
occupés.
OPT.
Nous demandons aux autorités
We call
israéliennes
on
de
the
respecter leurs
Israeli
obligations
authorities
vis-à-vis
to
de cette
respect their
agence des
obligations
Nations Unies
towards this
et son
UN
personnel
agency
international
and its international
local.
and local staff.
Il n'existe aucune, je dis
There
bien
is
aucune
no-
alternative
There is
crédible
no
à l'UNRWA.
credible alternative to
L'Office a un rôle humanitaire, mais aussi
It plays a humanitarian role,
fournit des services
but also
publics.
provides
Et il le
public
fait
services,
à un
and it
coût
does so
3 fois
at a
moindre
cost
que celui
3
des autres
times
agences des
lower
Nations
than the
Unies.
cost of other UN
L'UNRWA
agencies.
fait donc partie
UNRWA
de la
is therefore
solution à
part of
Gaza
the solution
et dans
in
le reste
Gaza
des territoires
and in the remainder
occupés.
of the OPT.
L'accord sur le cessez-le-feu continue à être
The
mis en
ceasefire
œuvre.
agreement
Il
continues
faut
to
donc
be implemented,
acheminer
and
massivement
therefore
de
we
l'aide.
must
Il faut
channel
aussi
massive
débuter sans attendre le
humanitarian
travail
aid,
de
and we must
reconstruction et
begin
permettre aux
immediately
enfants de
reconstruction
Gaza
efforts
de
and
reprendre le
enable
chemin des écoles qui
the
soient
children in
administrées
Gaza
par
to go
l'UNRWA.
back
Tous
to
les Palestiniens
school, which
doivent
will be
aussi pouvoir
administered by
accéder aux
UNRWA.
infrastructures de
All
santé
Palestinians must
opérées
also have
par
access
l'Office.
to healthcare facilities
L'UNRWA
run
joue
by
donc
the
un rôle
office.
stabilisateur
UNRWA therefore
essentiel
plays
dans la bande de
an
Gaza,
essential
mais aussi à
stabilizing role
Jérusalem et en
in the Gaza
Cisjordanie,
Strip,
ainsi
but
que
also
dans
in
les pays
Jerusalem
hôtes. Il
and
est
in the
donc
West
dans
Bank
l'intérêt
and in
d'Israël, notamment de sa
host countries.
sécurité,
It is
que
therefore in
l'UNRWA
the
puisse
interest of
opérer
Israel,
sans
particularly
entrave.
security interests,
La France
to which
continuera
France
d'être
is
un partenaire
committed
de
for
l'Office en
UNRWA to
2025,
operate
comme elle l'a été
unfettered.
depuis la
France
création
continues to be a partner
de
of the office
celui-ci
and
par
will
une
do so in
décision souveraine de l'Assemblée
2025
générale
since its
en
creation
1949. Lors
through
de la
a sovereign
conférence
GA
humanitaire
decision in
du 2 décembre
1949
dernier, la France a annoncé une nouvelle
at
contribution de
a
50
2
millions d'euros
December
pour la
International
population
Humanitarian
de Gaza en
Conference.
2025,
The
dont 20 millions
Minister
d'euros
of
pour
France
l'UNRWA.
announced a new
Elle continuera
contribution of
aussi de
15
veiller
million
à
euros
ce
for
que
the
soient
population
mises
of
en œuvre
Gaza,
les
which
réformes
includes 20
nécessaires
million for
à la
UNRWA.
neutralité de son
France
action,
will continue to ensure
notamment les recommandations du rapport Colonna.
necessary reforms
Monsieur
are
le
carried out to
Président,
ensure neutrality in its actions
existe
in
encore
accordance with the
75 ans
report
après sa
recommendations.
création, c'est parce
75
que la
years
communauté
after its
internationale
creation,
n'a pas
UNRWA
encore été
still
en mesure
exists,
de
and that's
régler
because the
la question
international community has
palestinienne.
not yet resolved
Il
the
est essentiel
Palestinian issue.
d'enclencher un
We
processus
must therefore begin
irréversible
an
pour la mise en
irreversible
œuvre
process
effective de
for
la
the
solution
effective
à deux États.
implementation of the two-state
L'avenir de la
solution.
bande de Gaza
The
doit
future of the
s'inscrire
Gaza
dans celui d'un
Strip
futur
must be
État
part
palestinien.
of a future
Il faut éviter que
Palestinian
le Hamas
state.
ne reprenne pied dans l'enclave
Hamas
et
must
donc
be
prépare le
prevented
retour
from
de
ever
l'autorité
regaining a
palestinienne
foothold in the
qui a
enclave, and we
vocation
must
à
prepare
administrer ce territoire.
for the return of the
C'est pour avancer
Palestinian
sur la
territory,
voie
which should
de la
administer this
solution à deux
territory.
États que la France co-présidera
It
avec
is in
l'Arabie
an effort to
Saoudite
make
en juin
progress on
prochain,
a two-state
conférence
solution that
internationale à
France
New
will
York.
co-chair with
Elle
Saudi
appelle
Arabia
les
next June
Israéliens
an
et les
international
Palestiniens
conference in New York for
à
the
emprunter la
implementation of
seule
a
voie
two-state
qui leur
solution. We call
garantira
on
un avenir
Israelis
de
and
paix et de
Palestinians to
sécurité.
choose the
Je vous
only
remercie.
path which will guarantee a future of peace and security. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank Algeria for requesting this meeting, supported by Somalia, focused on the work of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency of Palestine Refugees in the Near East, UNRWA. I also thank Mr. Philip Lazzarini, Commissioner General of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, and Mr. Jan Egeland, Secretary General, Norwegian Refugee Council, for their comprehensive and sobering briefings. Sierra Leone notes the extraordinary commitment demonstrated by UNRWA in providing life-saving and critical support